welcome to Pay It Forward. I've got an exciting new pattern for you all today. It is a little sleeping pup, and most of you would know that dogs are absolutely the love of my life, and I know that a lot of you feel the same. And this one is a really simple little pattern. It is made of felt, little fabrics. You even get to make his little dog bed as well. So all you need to do as usual is click on the link in the description below, download your free pattern templates, and we'll get sewing. So let me take you through the things that you're going to need to make up a little sleeping puppy here today. We're going to need your front and back body pieces, and they are cut from felt with fusible woven interfacing applied. You will need your two face pieces, and if you have a look there, you can see that I've cut the front piece of his face here in the tan fabric, and the back of his head I cut in a chocolate brown or a darker brown. Of course you can use black, anything. I fashioned this little one, designed him just to resemble a little Jack Russell Terrier. So when we fold those ears over, of course we're going to get that nice dark little fold over of the ears there. So they are both backed with fusible woven interfacing also. And you will need your little muzzle piece that sits just there on the face, and that has heat and bond applied. You'll need your little heart shape to add to his little bottom there, and that has fusible webbing applied, and also a little nose piece, which is a template that we actually stitch over, but a little template makes the job really easy. That also has fusible webbing applied to the back. You'll need a button because that's how we attach the head to the body. So just a reasonable size button. That one's about 25 millimeters. It doesn't matter whether it's 2-hole or 4-hole. You'll need some embroidery thread or pearl thread to sew in the little eyes and to stitch over that little nose. And you'll also need some extra strong thread, and perhaps in a couple of colors for your stitching. And to make our little bed, we need our two pieces cut from a fabric to suit. So this time I'm using a little flannelette, and I have applied fusible woven interfacing to that one as well. Also you will need a little bit of craft glue, clear craft and fabric glue, and a little bit of polyester filling. So I think first up we will start with our little dog bed, which is very simple. Now the first thing to do with our little dog bed is we're going to take each piece to the sewing machine, and you can see there that I've sewn a very close little zigzag stitch on that opening. You see little marks on your template, and that will just keep that little opening nice and true. When we're filling this little dog bed up, we don't want to be stretching that opening too much, because then we're going to have to close that one with a ladder stitch. So once you've done that, it's just a matter of putting right sides together, and you can pin that one into place. And we're going to take that one to the machine, and we're going to just stitch a 4 millimeter seam allowance from that side of the opening right the way around to this side of the opening. So once you have that seam sewn, you can see I've gone around that seam edge there with my pinking shears just to notch that edge, because it is a big long curve. Otherwise you can just use this scissors and just snip those curves. Now we just turn that one through. I have that one all turned through, and I've used my knitting needle to get in there and push out that seam all the way around, and then I've taken it to my iron and given it a good press. And it is important that we press that one, because our next step is to take will have in your pattern templates a little piece that is called your inner circle guide for your little dog bed. That's just a piece to pop on there, and we're going to trace around that one because that's our stitching guide. We're going to sew in that little base piece that will create our little centerpiece, and it's just a matter of measuring and making sure you've got that one lined up correctly, and it's the same all the way around the outside, and just mark in that little that little shape there, and then we take that one back to the machine and we just stitch around that entire section there. We don't need to leave an opening because we're going to be filling in all the way around that one. Our next step is to fill up our outside ring with some polyester filling, and I find that forceps are really handy for this, because what we want to do is we're going to come in at that opening and we're going to make our way around, right the way around, and we're going to fill one side at a time so that we can get right to that end. So it's just a matter of pushing that filling, try and get it right the way to about the middle of your other end. Just little pieces at a time, and you'll start to see that little risen area that will fill up. So we're going to fill up all the way around that side, and then we're going to fill up from there all the way around to the top, and even this section here. I have my little dog bed all filled out, and that's actually quite firm, and you find that just holds itself really well. And I've got it filled right up to the top there. I'll probably add a little bit more stuffing as I go. And our next step is just to close that opening. I've got an extra strong thread, and I have a very large knot in the end. And we're going to just come in at that seam line. We're going to sew this up with a ladder stitch. It's a stitch that we use for closing any sort of 3D stuffed items. You can see I'm just coming in right where that seam begins, where it starts to open out on one side. Take that needle through, that little knot will hold well. I like to put my thumb in there, right on the base of that seam. And it also helps keep that stuffing out of the way. And I'm just going to travel across, straight across, and I'm going to take one stitch down. You can see that's given me one stitch across there. Pull that one in nice and snug, and then we're going to go back into the same hole across the other side that we first came out of, and we're going to take the same length stitch as we did on the other side. And then we pull that one in, and you can see what that's going to do is we make our way down. Keep your stitches nice and small. What that's going to do is knit that all in together, and that seam will be quite invisible. And ladder stitch is one of those stitches that it does take a bit of time and practice. After a while your hands will get used to where they need to be and what they need to do to hold everything in place. But practice definitely makes perfect with this stitch. So you can see that one, we're just going to keep pulling that in as we go, and that stitch will be quite invisible. So I'm going to close that entire opening. As I go, I can add a little bit of stuffing as I get it closed a little more. So there we have our little dog bed all complete already. That opening's closed, and we're all ready for our little pup. You can see he just settles in nicely there. You can make these up in such great colours too. So let's get moving forward with our little puppy. The first thing that we need to do to start sewing our little body is the same as we did with the little dog bed. On those two openings, we're going to sew a very small, tight little zigzag stitch. It's a little stay stitch, and again it will just keep that little edge true, and it makes it much easier for us when we're going to ladder stitch that one closed. So once you've done that, your next step is to go ahead and fuse your little heart. Now have a look at your pattern template, and it will show you exactly where that heart sits. Make sure that you follow that template, because we are going to be sewing around that one, and we want that to sit in exactly the right position right there on his little bottom. So that one has heat and bond on the back, so we just remove that paper, and as I have here, just fuse that one into place. Now there's two ways that we can treat the outside edge of that little piece. You can take it to the machine, and you can sew a straight stitch very close to the edge all the way around just to settle that piece in place. or you can do what I'm doing, and I'm doing a little blanket applique stitch. I've got my extra strong Gutermann thread just in a slightly contrasting colour, and I'm going to be sewing a blanket applique stitch right the way around. And if you're not familiar with the blanket applique stitch, I do have a video that shows you exactly how to do this one, but that's going to give it a nice little contrast, and just as it has on this little one here. Now that our heart shape is placed, we're just going to sew our little body together, and we just pop right sides together, match up that little opening, those little opening marks, and we're going to leave that section open. I'm going to be sewing a 4mm seam allowance. You can clip all the way around, make sure it's all very well lined up, and we're going to be stitching from the start of that opening around right the way to the other side of that opening. So now I've turned that little one through, and I've pushed out all of those curves with my knitting needle, and also rolled out those seams. So we need that to be nice and flat, because now we're going to take, now in your pattern templates you'll find it's a little inner leg curve guide, and we just place that one on the outside, which is why we need it nice and flat. Place that one on the outside, and you're going to mark in your little leg line there, just across the top there, and it finishes there. You can see that. And we're just going to take that one back to the machine, and we're going to use a coordinating thread, and we're going to stitch that line. Make sure you're back and forth at the start and the finish here, and that just gives us that nice little indication that he's all curled up in there. Once you have that little leg curve sewn in there, you can go ahead and start filling up that little body. Again, I'm going to be using my forceps, and we need to fill up that lower section first. So basically we're looking that this is a little foot that's curled around. It's important that we get right into that little end piece there. And once you've filled out this little lower section, you can see how that comes up beautifully and creates that little shape. Once you've filled out that entire section there, then you do the same, get down right into this little corner here and fill out this section right up into the top here. Once we have that little body all filled and it's quite firm, you can see there, we can go ahead and close that opening. I use a little wool felting needle just to help pack all that filling in. Takes a little bit of time, but it's definitely worth it. It keeps it out of your way, and it'll pack that fibre in nicely just to finish off. So we're going to close this opening in exactly the same way as we did with our little dog bed, with a ladder stitch. Starting at the very top, I've got a big knot at the end of my extra strong matching Gutermann thread. You see that little knot there is going to hold, and I'm going to take my first stitch across, make my way down just exactly the same as we did when we closed that little opening there on the dog bed. And there you can see I have that opening nicely closed, and we can pop that little body aside and get started on our little head. So we're going to need the front of the head. We can pop the back of the head aside for now. And our first step is to remove our backing paper from our little muzzle piece, and we're going to fuse that one into place with a hot iron and a protective cloth. Make sure it's perfectly centered there. You'll see it'll line up with the lower edge. Press that one into place, and then take that one to the machine, and we're going to sew very close to that edge, just from the base here, right around that top edge and right around to the other side, as you can see there. And that will set that one nicely into place, and I always use a matching thread. There I have my little muzzle piece. You see that's all stitched into place, and I've now gone ahead and pressed on in the same way my little nose template, and the distance between the lower edge there to the very point of that little template is around about 7 millimeters, 3/4 centimetre, because we need room for our little seam and just have a little space underneath that nose. Now our next step is to cover that template with stitches, and I'm using pearl thread in black. You can use embroidery thread. I would suggest you use 2 strands, and I have doubled my thread, and we're starting at the little point at the base of his little nose there. Take your time to get exactly in that right spot, because this is really going to be seen. And you bring your needle through, and we're going to just take our stitches. We're going to make sure that they're not crossed over. Make sure they're sitting nice and flat. And I like to put my thumb on those to make sure that stays just right. And we're going to put our needle in right in the center of that template. And that's our first covering stitch. Make sure every time that you pull both of those threads independently, so those stitches stay nice and even. And we're simply going to make our way and cover that little template with stitches, first this side and then back, and cover this side and cast off on the back. And my little nose is all covered there. You can see, and by using that template, I thoroughly recommend always using a little template when you're sewing a nose on any stuffed animal, because it just makes it so much easier. You really can't get it wrong because you're just following that little line. So that gives us a nice neat result. So our next step is to sew the front of our head to the back of our head. And you can see that we've got little marks on our pattern template just below each ear. And so our line of stitching on the machine is still our 4mm seam allowance, and we go right round from there and do the lower edge of the face. We will be sewing the top of the head with a blanket stitch. Now you can clip that together and just go ahead and sew that on the machine if you like. I like to sew just an overcasting stitch, just a tacking stitch to keep it all in place, because I like that little jawline to be absolutely correct. So it just takes a couple of minutes, but I just whip around there, and so then I don't have to be having pins or clips when I'm sewing that little section under the machine. So I'll go right the way around, and then I'll take that to the machine and make that little stitch. Once you have your little headpiece sewn, your lower jawline, you can turn that one through as I have there, and make sure that you get into those seams again and push them all out, and make sure that you roll those seams out so you've got a nice even curve. Now the next step before we start filling, while we've got these pieces nice and flat, lay that one out flat, and you'll need to mark in your eye positioning. We want to do that now, because once it's filled we won't get an accurate result. So we pop those little marks in, and we just pop in a starting mark and a finish mark, because it's just one stitch that we do across for each eye, and it sits in just about 2mm from where the narrowest part of that little muzzle piece is, and where it just starts to turn out again. So about 2mm from either side, and then it's 3/4 centimetre across, and you just drop it down a little, just a little, so we've got that little slanted look. You see, that gives us that lovely sleepy eye. So once they're in place, now we can start filling the head, and we're going to be using our polyester filling. And again, it's simply a matter of packing that one in. Now this can be a little bit challenging to keep that filling down there while you're doing it, so I always support the end of the little face there, and you really want to take your time and try and pack out that lower edge of that little muzzle. And you're just going to fill up, and here's where your wool felting needle comes in really handy. because that stuffing really does want to come back out at you again. It's because we've got a wide top there. While you're packing it, you can be using your felting needle. Be careful you don't poke yourself. And just packing that filling down in there, and you can keep adding as you go, and that'll really help you pack it in. It doesn't have to be super firm, but we want it to be firm enough that when we add our little eye stitches, that they're going to indent nicely. So I'm going to be filling that one right up until that top curve, using my felting needle and shaping it and getting it to where I can glue my ears closed and the top of my head. You can see I've got my filling right up to the top there. Been using my felting needle, pack that one all in, but I'm still holding it there so it's not coming out of the top. So now we just need to glue just our ear sections together. So that's a simple matter, holding that front ear flap down, just using a clear craft and hobby glue, something that's suitable for fabric and something that's quite quick drying. And we're just going to apply some glue. Make sure we're getting the edges and follow the shape of that ear across the base. We really want that little ear section sealed together. And it's just a matter of lining those up. If you've got a little bit of overlap showing, don't worry too much, because we can always trim those once they're dry. So squeezing right down to that base so that we get that fold line in there across the top of the head. Now I like to add my 2 clips in those 2 crucial points on those 2 corners. And keep squeezing that one for a little while. The warmth of your fingers will start drying that glue. And then I'll just do exactly the same thing with the other side. And then we will let that one dry for a good 15 minutes or so. We want it completely dry before we start to stitch it. Now that my little ear sections are all dried, I've given them a little squeeze and a little mould and try and encourage them to the front. We're going to sew a little blanket stitch right the way around from the base of this ear across the top of the head to the base of this ear. I'm using an extra strong Gutermann thread, which I find really good for these little projects. And you can see that I've got a knot in the end. It's a single thread, and I've just come out between those 2 layers there, and that's where I'm going to start my stitch. Now before you start sewing, remember that the back of the ears are the part that we're going to see once they're folded over. So turn yours over and just check that your edges are nice and even. If you need to do some trimming, that's absolutely fine. You can trim up those edges there, just so that we've got everything nice. And be very aware when you're sewing, because we're sewing from the front, be very aware that make sure your stitches are the same back and front. So it's just your standard little blanket stitch. And I do have a video that shows you how to sew a blanket stitch. If you are not familiar with that one, in the video shows you in great detail how to do that one. But it's just with blanket stitch, it's just through both layers and coming out through the loop and pulling that one nice and tight. So through both layers, keep your stitches nice and even. Got some glue there, so you just take some pushing through, but we'll get there. You can see that little stitch is going to create a lovely little binding around that entire top edge. So make your way around right down to the other side. There you can see that my stitching is all finished, and I have left my needle on my thread, and I've just folded that little ear over and come in from behind and just made 2 stitches, just using the stitches I already have, just to pull in that little ear. And I'm just going to do the other one in exactly the same way. So just have a look and see how far you want your ear to fold over and where you want it to sit, whether you want it more outwards, whether you want it more facing in. It's entirely up to you. Just make sure that they're matching on both sides. And then because I'm already at the back, I'm going to dive back into that little hole and I'm going to come out around about where I want to make my first stitch through that little ear. Just pull that one nice and tight. Dive into the head, straight through the back. And you can see that's just pulled that one in nicely. I'll just come back through again. Just below that little ear there. And I will go in again over another stitch. Put that one over a little tug. And you can see that's just settled those ears in place there. Just cast off on the back and lose your threads into the head. Now the final step to this little head is sewing in our little eye, our little closed eyes. And because we've already got our marks there, we're all set. Now I've got my doubled pearl thread here with a knot at the end. And because we're joining the little head to the body, we're not going to see any of the stitching behind, so we don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to come in at the center, at the back of the head, at about the center, and I'm going to come out at my first little spot for my eye there. So right on that spot, and we're going to pull that one through. I'm going to press down with my thumb and compress that down. So really pull on that knot, and then we're going to go back into the other little mark we have, but we're going to angle our needle back to come towards the middle. That just gives it that nice pull-in angle. Try and make sure that your stitches aren't, your threads aren't crossed. Keep compressing with your thumb. And we pull that little one in. Now you can manipulate that felt to create a nice little indentation of that eye. And once you've got that pulled in, you want to keep that tension up from behind. And you want to lock in that stitch. Just a matter of sewing a couple of stitches to keep that tension up. Check that you've still got that nice pull in there, and we have. I'm going to put another one over the top of that. You can see there, that's nicely pulled in, and then we're going to repeat exactly the same with the other side. We're going to go in from the center, going to come out right on that little mark that we've made. We're going to squeeze down again, holding it with my thumb, keeping my thread straight, back in the other side and coming out to the center again. We're pulling that one in, adjust your fabric around it. And we're just going to anchor that little one in on the back just as we did the first one. So our final step is to join our head to our body, and the way that we do that is I'm using a doll needle. You don't need a doll needle, but you need a reasonably long needle to be able to pass through that body and the head. And I have doubled thread of extra strong upholstery thread. You don't need a knot in the end. Of course, you need your button. Now, estimating where your little head gets joined may take you a couple of goes. I've made one already, so hopefully I'll get it in the right spot. If you don't, it doesn't matter because it's easily pulled out and it's easy to check it before you anchor it in. So just have a look at your little puppy and see, remember that it's going to be on a pivot, so you want him to be able to turn his head either way. Once you think you've got that positioning right, you have to have a bit of a guesstimate about where that's going to be. We're going to be going into his head about halfway, 3/4 of the way down. So I've estimated at the back there, which is where we start. As I said, I've made one before. So I'm going to go in, first of all, through my button. And then I'm going to go in the little mark that I've made. You want to make sure that you're going straight through. So look at that from every angle so that you are going straight through, not going through on an angle. And coming out. And then we're going to take a piece of our little head. So it's just over halfway down, sort of across his cheeks there. And we're going to dive in, and we want to take some filling and some of the fabric. Just make sure that you're going straight across. And then we're going to dive back into our little body there. Again, we want to make sure we're coming out straight, right through to the back. And we're going to go through the other side of that button. It looks fiddly, but it all comes together in the end. Six hands would be useful now. Right, so right through that button. And you can see that you're able to pull those threads in, and you'll be able to check your positioning. You'll be able to check that you've got him in the right spot. Of course, you're going to compress him down and really pull that one down. So if you're happy with that positioning, all you need to do is compress and tie off that those two thread ends 2 or 3 times, and then you can just snip the ends or lose those thread ends into the back. So make sure your positioning's right, because if it's not right the first time, it's nothing just to pull that head off and pull those threads out and try again. But I think I'm pretty happy with that, so I'll go ahead and knot that one off. And there we go, little head all securely in place, that little button behind. And you can see that you can move his little head, have him sleep in any position. So we're going to pop him in his little dog bed, and he's there. Aren't they absolutely gorgeous? I love them. They are the perfect gift. They really are. They are the perfect gift for, it's not just for kids, but for adults. They're fabulous for an office desk, for somebody who's perhaps missing their little doggo at home. And of course, remember, you can make them up in any colours that you like. So you can really make them up in greys and blacks and mixed colours and so on. They don't have to be that tone, that shade. And I think they're absolutely fabulous. And I hope you find a place somewhere in your home for my little sleeping pup. Well, thank you for joining me today and sewing with me and making up this little project. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. I've got a lot more exciting things coming up, all sorts of different kinds of patterns. a bit of fashion upcycling, all sorts of things. So make sure that you subscribe because you don't want to miss any of those. You can follow me on Instagram and see some behind the scenes bits and pieces that I like to do, and I love to hear your comments. Keep talking to me, people. I love it. And you can tell me what you would like to see moving forward. I'm always going to do my best to design for you and give you what you're looking for. Most of all, everybody, when something good comes your way, make sure that you pay it forward, because you know what, we all can. So until next time, it's hooroo from me.